we talk about police brutality, we talk about lynchings, we talk about sexual assault. I know we don't talk about those things enough, but in general, when we talk about racism, we're talking about these big events, violent events. And so what we were excited about with Hippolyta was nothing like that has happened to Hippolyta. Hippolyta, over the course of the show, isn't a victim of police brutality. She's not being attacked by the monsters. She's not physically assaulted. But we saw her as experiencing a different kind of racism, and we decided to call it shrinking. And what we thought of was all of the Black women that we know, all of the genius, artistic, powerful, resilient, all of those words that you all use to describe yourself, all of those Black women are also experiencing another form of racism and sexism, and it's the shrinking. And it's what she talks about with George later on at the end, towards the end of the episode. But we thought somebody like Hippolyta, with that mind and that passion that she had when she was a child, what happens over the course of many decades, and what happens when you start a family, and what happens just existing in America, how you are taught to shrink along the way. And I think when you're young, you fight against it. And then the older you get and the more responsibilities you have and the bills pile up and you have children that you need to take care of, I think what a lot of us do is we put our stock into our families, and we pour into our families, we pour into our communities, we pour into our children, which is a beautiful, wonderful, powerful thing. But then we are taking away from ourselves a lot of the time as we're doing that. And so that's what we wanted to talk about. That was Hippolyta's struggle. And so we sent her on this epic journey into the multiverse. And I think it's really important that we started with pleasure. So when she lands in this other planet, Planet 504, first she's terrified. And LaShawn and I talked about this a little bit too, right? There's the exciting part of starting therapy. There's the exciting part of choosing yourself. And then there's the scary, terrifying part when, this huge creature is standing in front of you with a giant afro and you're trapped in a white room. You feel like you're in a prison. And so that's also a part of the journey, that initial fear of where am I? What did I do? How did I get here? But then after that fear, when she finally names herself, the first thing she says is, I'm going to be on stage dancing with Josephine Baker. And she ends up in Paris. And what we thought was one thing that Hippolyta's been robbed of is just pleasure, just extreme joy and pleasure. And so I think that's also a big part of any move towards change. A lot of times we challenge ourselves. I'm going to work out X amount of times a week. I'm going to fight back this. I'm going to end this relationship. But a lot of times you just need to have fun first. And so we wanted to put her in this position where she could have these things that she never quite had in America. So she's dancing on stage and she's trying new things. And there's this energy of joy. And then that joy also leads her to realize that she's been missing that her whole life. And it doesn't mean that she's had a terrible life. I think what's important about Hippolyta is she's had joy. She had this wonderful relationship. She has this beautiful daughter. She has a community, but that doesn't mean that she's had everything that she deserves. And there's a part of her that knows that. So that first step was pleasure. And then as she's having all of these great moments with Josephine, it leads her to realize that she's really angry. And this was my favorite scene to write. This was my favorite bit of dialogue to write, because I'm really angry. And my anger comes out very differently from some people. And I think what I was thinking was, there have been so many times in my life where I've just wanted to be more violent than I was, where I've just wanted to lash out in a way that I felt like I wasn't allowed to. And I wanted to give Hippolyta that. And I worked on this scene with Misha Green, who created the show, and she co-wrote the episode with me. And I said, I want Hippolyta to say, what was the line? Sometimes I just want to kill white folks. And Misha was like, well, okay, she could say that, but where is that coming from? And that's how we got to this idea of shrinking, and that line about how America has found a really smart way to lynch her. And we thought about that for all of the Black women watching, that you have this thing going on, you have this rage and this anger. And even though some of the violence isn't being inflicted upon you, and of course, for a lot of us, the violence is being inflicted upon us, but for even those of us who aren't, just bearing witness to it over and over again, it feels like something is being cut off. It feels like your life is ending. And so we wanted her to say that there's a way to lynch somebody by just making them feel very small. And so it's Josephine Baker who reminds her, you're Hippolyta. So then when she names herself Hippolyta again, now she's a Dahomey warrior. She's an Amazonian warrior in Africa. And that was really important because a big part of therapy is also just talking about the shit you're mad about. Excuse my language. But the stuff that you're really angry about, it has to come out. And when I thought about this scene, there's this documentary that I love. It's called Brooklyn Girls Fight Club, and it's set in Brownsville. And I was like, I want Hippolyta to have the experience of being surrounded by a bunch of Black women and learning how to fight back, literally, physically learning how to fight back. And so that's what that scene is about, just that release of anger and the rage that she's feeling. And there's something that she says to Josephine, which is, there's somebody else that I'm angry at, and she can't say the name yet. So we take her to the next scene, and the person that she's angry at is her husband, George. And this was another scene that we spent hours talking about, because we wanted her to be able to say, I love you and I miss you and I'm grieving you, and you were a part of the problem, and you were shrinking me too, or you let me shrink myself. And we talked a lot about, again, Black women in their households, in their communities. There's something about taking on a leadership role, and then there's something else about having no choice but to be a leader, and having no choice but to be a fighter, and having no choice but to be the backbone of your family. And we wanted Hippolyta to speak to that and to say, you know, you fell in love with me because you saw something bold and audacious in me, but it was also very convenient for you to keep me small and to not let me go on those trips with you and to not let me do all of those things that you knew I was capable of. And she's really lucky, and this is definitely kind of a fantasy, because I don't think most husbands are even capable of admitting that they're a part of it. But we did allow George to first, you know, he first denies that he did anything, and then he admits, yes, I was a part of the shrinking, and he admits that was a failure. And that's kind of a big moment for her, just being able to confront this person that she loves. And I think that's true for therapeutic journeys too. Sometimes you get the response that you're looking for, a lot of times you don't, but that confrontation and saying, you know, you shrank me. And once she says that, once she's fought all of the fights and she's had the pleasure, now she can name herself Discoverer. And that is Hippolyta's true name, so to speak. Like, now she can really go on all of these epic journeys that she's always longed to go on. And so she turns into the real Arithia Blue, which is that comic book character that Diana created for her, which is also a great point, right? Because a lot of times the people around us are telling us that we're superheroes and that we can do anything, and we don't really believe them. And so we have to go on this journey to finally be able to name ourselves that thing. And then there's the end of the episode, which was very divisive in the room. And a lot of people who watched it were also upset. But at the very end, Hippolyta does not go back, right? She thinks about her daughter, but she's had this amazing experience, and she chooses to stay in the multiverse for a little while longer. And there were lots of reasons that we talked about why this was an interesting idea. But what I would say to everybody here is that sometimes choosing yourself really is, you really are making sacrifices. You really are saying no to people you love. So in that moment, Hippolyta is saying, I'm more important than Diana. The experience that I need to have right now is more important. And that the reason it was such a, like, think of all the things that happened on the show that were very bold and crazy, but that scene, we were fighting in the room, you know, with love, but we were fighting because it was like, oh my God, are we really going to have a mom not go back to her daughter? And the reason I'm really glad that we did that is because I think that that's important to say, even briefly, or even for however long Hippolyta is in the multiverse, she needed to choose herself, and she needed to put her own pleasure first. And there's something about that I think a lot of Black women and Black femmes need to hear and think about. As uncomfortable as it is, sometimes your journey requires, a lot of times it requires selfishness, right? And we don't like that word, but there's something to that word. There's something to really taking time to yourself. And that's what she's doing in that moment. And so it's a tough choice that she makes, but she makes it. And I love that we started this call with a poem, and I wanted to just call back to one of the lines from the Lucille Clifton poem, because it was the line that really jumped out at me. And it was, my one hand holding tight my other hand. And that hit me, because it's like, it's just you sometimes. It's your one hand and your other hand. And Hippolyta's on this solo journey, but she's being guided by all these Black women, right? So on the road, she runs into Bessie Stringfield, who was the motorcyclist. And then there's Josephine Baker. And then there's the woman, the warrior who trains her, Nawi. And then of course there's Beyonce with the big afro who's guiding her. And so there's this idea of like doing your own therapy, doing your own work for yourself, but also knowing that you're in community with these other women who want you to be a fighter, a survivor, a discoverer, to name yourself all of these different things. And I think that Hippolyta's journey and her being bold enough to get to go on the road trip, which first of all was crazy enough, but just getting in a car and driving off by yourself in 1950s Chicago, and having the audacity to name herself all of these things and to figure out that time machine. I think it's very much in line with what LaShawn was saying about Shirley Chisholm, just having the audacity to be like, yeah, I'm a Black woman and I'm fully capable of running this country, which we know she was. So I think, looking to Hippolyta, I would like to believe, and I hope that she's now, in conversation with other incredible Black women and Black femmes who we've looked to and have been able to look at and say, okay, she's being bold, I can get out there and be bold. She's being audacious, I can be more audacious. And it's not easy, but the results can be kind of amazing. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, guys.
Wow.
Oh my. You know what? Can everybody just come off mute for a second? I just need Shannon to hear everybody.
So congratulations.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you for telling that story.
Thank
I'm
you.
a cancer, I'll start crying.
Wait a minute. So it's so funny. I'm listening to you. Is Anisha still on? I'm like, how did Shannon's birthday? Because I am big. I need to know who
I am taking it all in, LaShawn.
But I mean, I don't know if you can see, I'm giving you the Wakanda Forever hug, Shannon.
Yes.
Oh my, thank you so much. This was so, I've watched it, several times, but this just even having the dialogue, with you, the mind behind those words, the heart behind those words. I just, I'm going to stop right now. But I just thank you so much. Shannon will stick around for a couple of minutes, right? Because she also wanted to give time if you all had questions. So we can go back on mute now. But if you have any questions directly for Shannon, before we go, so we're going to break out into our own little rooms after this to talk through, this whole experience, right? And how we feel like at the moment, watching Hippolyta, but just thinking about your journey, right? What are you, when you are going through this process, you are about to name yourself, right? So before we go through that process, if you have any questions for Shannon, please put it in the chat. Dion will moderate the chat. And so she's here to, grace us for a few more minutes. And thank you for hanging out with us, Shannon, to answer any questions that you all might have.